Okay, I want to add something here to the chapter 15 PowerPoint. I looked over I've got actually multiple PowerPoints on this chapter, and one of the sections that I want to cover here at the end before we begin chapter 16 is on slide number 34. It kind of gives you an idea of the debt of this country, okay? Because one of the things we talked about is within demand side policy, you spend money, the government spends money it doesn't have, okay, with the idea that it's going to get the economy going. But the problem is when you do that, you incur all kinds of debt. All right, so again, these numbers are dated as of November 26th of 2018. The national debt is $23 trillion. But that doesn't include state and local debt, which is about $3 trillion. And that doesn't include agency debt, which is $9.5 trillion. And it also doesn't include what's called unfunded liabilities, okay? Liabilities that the government has promised to pay for, that it doesn't have the money for, okay? And that is Social Security, Medicare, and federal debt held by the public, federal employees, and veterans benefits, okay? So the federal debt per person is $70,000. If, in other words, if the government said, listen, pay up, and we could basically erase the debt. So we've got to realize that there are problems and challenges with deficit spending with demand side economics. The reason it works is because of keeping the interest rates low. You can kind of fund that, or at least allow the good times to keep rolling because of the interest rates that are down. Another reason why it keeps working is the international perception of the United States economy as being the strongest economy in the world. As long as that perception remains, countries are basically open to doing business with us and things of that nature. Once that perception changes, you can't maintain this. So I want to show you some slides here that kind of gives you an idea of the net public debt that we have. So if you go to slide number 35, you can see that section there where it's the percentage of debt. And you can see obviously during World War II in the 1940s, it went way, way, way up. Net public debt as a percentage of GDP went up to almost 120%. If you move forward obviously to 2010, again, I don't have the most current numbers here, but you can see where it arose quite a bit under President Obama's presidency. And again, this is not because of a war, but this is because of a policy choice that he had where he engaged in a lot of deficit spending because of TARP, the Toxic Asset Relief Program, and the Reinvestment Act. In other words, a lot of deficit spending trying to get the economy going, and then a lot of the entitlement programs that he advanced. Okay, so that has increased a lot of our debt. If you go to the next slide, in slide number 36, it becomes much more pronounced. You begin to see where our national debt in trillions is, you can see how high it's gotten. Again, a lot of this has grown from 2000 to 2008 under President Bush's presidency. We incurred a lot of debt. Again, a lot of it because of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. In President Obama's presidency, there in the blue, a lot of that did not have to do with fighting a war, but attempts of deficit spending, demand side policies, trying to get the economy out of the tailspin. It was in a lot of his entitlement policies. If you look at the next slide there, again, you can see the U.S. debt ceiling has risen no matter who has been in office. Lots of different debt going on there. Again, it's just something you need to be aware of. Probably the most graphic display of this is in slide number 38. It shows America's finances on the top there in the green in comparison with deficit spending there in the orange. That's a lot of what Obama did in his presidency. Of course, Bush did as well, not as much. But then if you look at the red, that's all the debt. So if you look at the revenue, which is a small slice of America's GDP, but then you look at the debt, it is multiple times beyond our revenue. In other words, we are incurring far more debt than we are making as a nation, okay? And is that a problem? Yeah, I would submit to you it's unsustainable. I would submit to you that in a lot of the promotion of socialism, like a Bernie Sanders or someone of his ilk, trying to do a lot of spending with entitlements for the American people. The concern I have, the concern that many economists have is, how high can you continue to incur debt and keep having these entitlement programs where the government is providing things for people and counting on taxes to provide for that? Okay, do you have the tax base to support that? One of the things we're dealing with right now as a country is we're in the midst of what they call a demographic winter, where you've got over 70 million baby boomers who are in their late 60s and 70s basically asking for the entitlements that were promised to them by previous generations, like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, riding on the backs of the 43 million of the Gen Xers. That's my generation. Okay, in other words, you've got 70 million people asking for entitlements that are meant to be provided for by 43 million Americans who are in the maximum age that they're contributing towards taxation. Can you fund that? Now, that's the bad news. The good news is there's some 70-some million of the baby boomers' children who are the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs that are coming up. But the problem is they're not at the earnings point where they're making enough money to contribute taxes to support that. So we're in this, what they call a demographic winter. So it'll be very interesting how we get through that. And then the final slide here, this will be slide number 39. This is the foreign debt holders of U.S. debt. Okay, and you can see where 16% of our federal debt is held by Japan. China holds 17%. Again, a lot of this is we borrow from other countries to fund some of this deficit spending. One of the ways that we funded the war on terror, the war in Iraq, is that we incurred close to $1 trillion from China. In other words, the reason why taxes weren't raised in 2002 and 3 and 4 and 5, where America felt a pinch in wartime like they did during World War II, where there was a lot of cutbacks of meat and different things like that, is because basically we got funds from China to support that. Okay, so again, there's a lot going on there. So I want you to see this. I think it's important as young voters and maybe some not so young that are watching this. The argument for socialism plays well with the younger generation. But the problem is that many of the younger generation, they don't see the debt that we have and see that the more and more deficit spending we engage in, we're basically punting the ball for future generations to pay for that. Is that the best decision for our generation to get all of the, how do I say this tactfully, all of the benefits while throwing all the responsibilities to pay for it on future generations? Okay, so it's just something worthy of consideration. So I'm going to close here and we'll begin with chapter 16 next.